Nothing to see here, crickets. Let's just be crickets. Let's continue to not look at what we need to look at so we can just excuse away what we have to do, because that's just easier. Seems to be the modus operandi of crickets, and continuously so, to my chagrin, if I can say that, though it's not a laughing matter. It's beyond serious. For those of you listening on Prodcast, it should be BTWRLM192, I think. Yeah, folks, you just look around, you see the wrong thing, you see the thing that fits your view of the world, and that's really all that gets restated. And interesting dynamic was happening here this last week around not what I was saying, just the subject matter of some of the last week's discussion that I keep wanting to wipe my hands clean of until I start seeing proper action. And we'll talk a little bit more about, I'm going to try and offer some more information here on what's missing in some of this discussion regarding the DAPL. But in the meantime, I forgot to mention something. With all the things in my mind that I'm building to say, there is just really is so much to say. It's in trying to give people really somehow come out of what's in my mind over really 30 years. It's amazing just to think about that. I actually went through all that time, didn't realize it, didn't realize what I was missing. I was focused on certain things, and I'm here to talk to you all behind Woodshed, give you principles that I've learned through that time that really none of us did learn. Unless we somehow were violated in such a way that got us to turn to it. That people, I don't know if they really don't notice that they appreciate. Well, I know that there's an appreciation. Let's not put that out. Let's not make this so general. I know people appreciate it, but I don't believe that they understand where their appreciation should take them, given that they make an appreciation of what I say and produce for you all. That there are just certain things that I've learned that have to be done a certain way. And it's not because I like it or underwrite it or any of that. It's the fact of that's what has to happen that I'm finding, and I'm trying to really, I've been working so hard, it's just driving me nuts, it tires me out. How do I start to impress upon people what's important? It seems that gets filtered out pretty quickly by what everyone's prejudice is and what they think the fairy tale they're believing is. And I say it that way because it just seems that's what the game is. But so much to say. There's so many answers when you start reading about, even in the occupiers, statutes, and codes, that people want to throw that out and say, "Oh, well, I don't want to live like that." I'm trying to tell you that you better reassess reality here. Don't think that you're going to evade this thing, and that's the point. You should avoid it. And there's certain ways to do that your beliefs on certain things or your disregards are not going to make a better future for your little ones and the little ones of your friends. And this is really the point. And then I was just talking to another friend of mine. I don't even know why I talk. I don't have any of the little ones in the future going, and so what am I even really contributing? Except there's something about this that's not right if I don't. I have seen a thing or two. I've applied a thing or two. Whether or not I fully can communicate what those things are or the subject, the broadness of the subject matter to understand, that allows you to do even more and more. This is not just, I need to know this one thing. This ends up being, I need to know lots, because that gives me, I can walk around with a big smile on my face because there's not one angle they can come at me on unless they want to expose themselves to be the criminal. And really, that's the only real balance. Getting the occupier to expose he's really the occupier. There's lots of things to do within the codes and statutes that everybody doesn't want to address because, there's the codes and statutes. That's legal. Well, get over yourself on that. That's what you live in, and then you better learn about that. And when I took the attitude before, we're going to find, I was looking for my exemption to all this nonsense. I won't go through too much more than to say I've told you the story about me reading the motor vehicle code of a state. I read the book 2.5 times. It looks like a Bible, and I was on my third way through No, it's not the little pamphlet you take your test on. It's the motor vehicle code. I had read it. I was on my halfway through the Bible of the motor vehicle code, and I realized I missed the whole and entire point looking for an exemption for me in that code. I knew it was there. At least that's what I thought. That's what I told myself. And that's what kept me reading. Actually, it was a good thing to hold it because I needed to read enough to start getting to the point I could laugh at myself. But that code is actually the occupier's code. And why? After 3 times it occurred to me, why would I even think to look for an exemption in the law? And yet there was an exemption in there. Once I came to the realization of the reality I was into, all of a sudden I was allowed to see a bigger and greater awareness. And I also had now the foundation of all the work I'd taken and all what seemed to be a waste of time. And it was at some level, but again, it's not, because it forms the foundation of why you even have the new foundation for the new awareness that gets you to the next possible step. I realized that they started to become the nascent forms of the idea of what I use when I say the word jurisdictions. There's different powers and authorities that have different places to operate. And so you have to understand the field of battle, the territory that you're in. It's just that simple. And a lot of people would just say, I know they're all corrupt and that's it. That's the beginning and the end of it. Oh, I know. Well, it isn't all you need to know, and it isn't all that has to happen, because if you don't stop it, it continues and it feeds on the next one, this thing, this fallen nature that it's in every man and woman. And so we don't come to terms here. It's not happening. I just don't see how it can. I guess it can happen by accident. Miracles do happen, I suppose. We can see certain things that appear to be miracles, but that's not likely. I wouldn't want to plan it's like you don't want to go to the Second Amendment. That's not really a good plan. That's not a plan of success. That's a plan of failure, and you're just going to hope beyond hope you're a success. And we see historically that never seems to really work out. So last week I was talking about all these statutes and things. There's so much to talk about and what to do, that there's power inside the statutes. If you know what they're doing, they show you they actually make room for your rights. They actually make room for your private self, if you know how to see and read what's going on. And I try to bring a lot of that, whether or not you fully and readily recognize it. A lot of that I'm finding out really is again and over and over and over that you're not reading enough when I'm asking you to go read some of these things for yourself to get a nice foundational understanding beyond your opinion of how screwed up it all is. I was talking about the marijuana problem and the situation in Oregon with the agencies not being able to get the labs working, and it's going to diminish the entire industry. And I missed the entire point that I was actually wanting to talk to you about on an answer for that. It's right in your administrative codes in your states. And this goes on for anything that they consider that you're doing that's an enterprise. In other words, you are a person liable to tax on that, however you think, but however the statutes say you are. And there's outs that you can use. I've actually told you about this one before, and I forgot to say it last week, but let me read from last week's Oregon marijuana lab problem in the state. I wanted to point out two things. One is this paragraph: the policy shift transforms Oregon's marijuana labs from an unregulated cottage industry. Did you know that it was an unregulated cottage industry, folks? Oh, man. So right here they're telling you something, and we flew right by it. On our concepts of all this over the decades. People going to jail over this stuff. Anyway, let me read the paragraph. The policy shift transforms Oregon's marijuana labs from an unregulated cottage industry into a central part of the state's regulated market. The state's new testing standards are intended to address pesticide contamination, which remains a concern in Oregon and in other states with legal pot markets. So did you know this is the state's regulated market? It's not yours. So these permitted issues are things of state concern, not your concern. You just happen to be the one that is moving the industry along because you weren't really intelligent enough when you got all excited about this to actually do it, sit back, think about it, Be careful that the ring wasn't in your nose that they were tugging on, and do it more correctly. So this is a state's market that they've developed when legalizing this thing that used to be an unregulated cottage industry. Oh, it certainly was regulated, but people didn't understand that it actually wasn't regulated if you found out you had a right by the property laws that you were granted underneath the use of your land, that everyone forgets because they use the statute, which comes in as the corporate side, top, also in charge of business. And we don't have a brain, two cells in our brain to figure out how to look at this pretty quickly to undo and create the real resistance against this, better than what I see people throwing their body at the system and it will gleefully beat on you. You volunteered your body get in the way and they'll beat on you because that's what that system's about. They're a hammer, you're a nail. And you want to keep putting yourself as a nail in there, they're going to pound on you. No doubt. I've been trying to show you don't have to do that. So here was what I missed, and this is I was a little disappointed in myself for not really bringing up this point. So you are into a state, when you legalize something, you are in a state business, not your business. They just use you, as I called last week on the Blogcaster, you're a government sharecropper on your own land. And so we see another reason why you don't want to legalize. But here's the last part that I didn't miss, that I didn't get to, for the way to move this thing forward through your administrative procedures in the state. Now, each one of your states has everyone's different. This made it kind of difficult. This was one of the difficult things on the separation. They're all underneath the federal thumb, but they all have different ways of keeping things straight. And so each state's different that way. And this was a little difficult. That's why I hoped when I was requesting a long time ago that people start learning their own state laws, then we all get together and so we can use our information on how we apply in the different states very quickly. None of that has happened. It's the same failure I found in the Jefferson Mining District. Nobody really wants to step up. Boy, we got a core crew of really crack people doing this thing. I don't mean taking crack. I mean they're really sharp at what we do. We each have a nice power within what our expertise is, and we come together to make it work. And for just a handful of us, things are happening that are just phenomenal. It takes a time, but the little crew we have running in through the battlefield is really taking out the enemy pretty good. So it doesn't take many of us. It just takes that we work together with our different specialty, if I can say the state laws that way. But let me go through these paragraphs and then point out something. It's really right in the administrative procedures. This is an administrative agency, so that's where you have to go. For all the people that want to say, oh, we can't go into statutes because it's legal. No, that's what you're living under, whether you agree with it or not. They're going to be imposing you with this for a couple of reasons. And no one really listens to what I'm saying to understand how that works so they can make that the record and expose that part. And it underpinned our lawsuit back in 2013. It's all the same answer, it seems to me. It just depends on what you focus that answer on. What's the oppression coming after you? Bo Whitney, an economist with executive at Golden Leaf Holdings, a company that grows, processes, and sells marijuana, worries producers will face a long wait to get their product into the legal market. Into the legal market. I wonder how much of the non-legal market he's running. But notwithstanding that, he's sitting there as a producer saying, I'm going to have a problem. I'm concerned. I'm saying this particularly because you have to have this has to develop as elements that you put in a short list of things that are going on. It limits the ability of the market to grow, he said. Does he have the right to expect a growth? Might be something you would consider as a list of things that are this failure in the state to provide to the government, to the industry, it now is regulating as a political power. Does he have a right to expect growth? Would be an interesting question. I would assert it as the right that I do have the right as a legal grower to have growth. But that's not his real problem here, though he doesn't hit in the first point. He's got to worry about whether or not he can sell at all. That should be his first problem. That would be another sentence on a list of things that I'm building here as I get to the point. As I read two more paragraphs, I think it is. So far, as it goes on, 2 labs have been accredited and licensed by the state. Advocates of the industry say that's not enough to process the volume of marijuana being grown for the regulated market. I want to keep knowing, they keep mentioning this. I want to know, where's this unregulated market, folks? Now we hear from the authorita, Amy Margolis, an attorney who represents marijuana businesses, said, without additional accredited labs, the industry's viability is threatened. Now understand that the attorney is also an agent of the state, is also officer of the court on the judicial side. She's an agency on the executive side, and members of her fraternity and brotherhood are also legislators. Her statement is one of fact within the state now, but hers is actually an authority you can use, that the industry's viability is threatened. Now, why is that important? Because that's an official, an officer of a judicial court saying this industry is having trouble because of what? Because of the administrative imposition that was created when they didn't get enough labs when the people said that it could be sold. So you're seeing a fiduciary failure in the government, and it's going to affect the industry. Now, under administrative law, what does that mean? Well, if anybody would just go read it, yeah, there's a lot to read in these APA, state APA things, but if you read them and read slow and think about what you're reading, you're going to see there's answers. You've heard of this thing called a takings, where they can't take private property without due process and compensation. Within even administrative law, and this is the thing I was trying to get through also at DAPL, if there's a property to have that they haven't proven yet, but notwithstanding, let's back here. If there is a power and a right and a property identified that's been inhibited to the point that it economically harms a business, there's a provision in the administrative rules to petition the administrative body for a waiver so that that imposition of regulation won't harm the economic viability of that business. Now, why the attorney here, who represents the so-called represents the marijuana businesses, only believes that the threat is unactionable, is beyond me to understand, when it's right there to say she can write for these businesses a waiver of the imposition of the rule that is causing an economic harm. I'm pausing here. Dead air is a bad thing, but I'm trying to speak a little slower here for those of you, thinking that there's a way out that you can just ignore and there's no tools and no help and there's nothing you can do. I dropped that little bomb on the DEQ attorneys. 3 attorneys were talking to the miners, years and years and years ago, 2005, 2006, somewhere back in there. And I dropped that little tidbit on those. I said, if you're going to treat us as a business, a commercial business and not the producers, I want the form for the waiver of the imposition of your regulation that is now economically harming me. And though I don't swear, I swear I saw their mouth hit the table and bounce back up into their chin in unison when they realized that we're going to have to do that because I just requested it. Now, they promised to give us the form, which never came. But after I said that, they also never actively prosecuted permits against the miners anymore either. So it's a silent win that I found the answer to inside the administrative procedures, everything that everybody wants to run from, within the administrative procedures of the states for how the agency may interfere by their regulations with an industry to its economic harm or viability. You can ask for the regulation that's causing the harm to be waived. And if they don't, then you get a harm that's a takings. that if all these highfalutin attorneys really meant to represent you, and all these people that are marijuana businesses had a brain, actually understood what this country was about, and that there are these protections, I don't think that the state of Oregon would not be having labs really quickly, or there'd be a whole lot of marijuana growers having waived their requirements to file whatever until this got straightened up. That I don't know why that isn't even an attempted, and that's not, at least for our point now, a solution to threatening an entire industry that is applicable in every aspect of administrative regulatory imposition. So what I just told you is when you have to file for a permit or comply with a code or get a license, they deem you to be a business if you can show that those things will interfere with a right that you had and take that right from you without any compensation or good reason. And they cannot fulfill the fulfillment of that. You can have that provision waived. And where you're going to find that is in the administrative procedures of your state. So, I guess I can keep repeating that. You can argue with me. You can think that you can't use the system to do the system. The system's going to be there to beat you down. You better start learning what your tools and your shields are, and really your weapons. What's your real offense that you want to put? You want to put the offense they charge you with, or the ones you use as a remedy? Has been boggling my mind in listening and watching people respond or not respond really to what I've been saying. I've said this before, same subject matter, same remedy. I'm just applying it to this Oregon marijuana business, that even though you legalized it and that was a problem, there is a remedy within that case, that you can find that remedy is applicable in all instances that a business is being economically harmed. If people would actually think about what I just said, and if we really got together, really started to think about what I'm saying, since you're presumed by your status, by the name, by its designation in the state to be an entity of commerce in the state, if you could figure out how you can wrap your whole life into a business that's failing by the regulations, don't you think you have a cause to write for an exemption? And yes, that would be the long way around, but to get to your rights that are available to you, but it's better than whining about it, and it sets a precedent. And when all y'all are doing it, they're going to have to come up with an answer. And it's going to have to conform with those darn rules that everyone wants to avoid. So you have to understand, I'm talking from a concept where the government imposes upon producers the status of a commerce entity. That's two violations against us to start with. That I said, okay, you have to understand how this works, folks. I said, okay, they're going to treat producers as commerce entities. We can't stop that part. Let's go ahead and jump in as a commerce entity and see what's there for us to use to protect ourselves. And lo and behold, because of this due process and compensation that has to be given to rights and properties, and I extend it to remedies because that's a property right in defense of your property. It's a pertinent the right of defense in the country of the United States where government was supposed to protect you all. I say those things are infringed and diminishing my capacity in the concept of the status of the commerce entity you have imposed upon me, and I want all those regulations waived for me. Or pay me. And I don't know about y'all, but being free has got a high price tag. And so what you do is you start pressing. You have one tool to keep pressing on these people in order to make what is otherwise a violation a waived constriction, a waived restraint, or money. Now, they're not going to have enough money. So your point in the office of that is to see the waiver of the restraint, isn't it? And so if these companies were to just do that and then document the loss of that business and their viability, see, it's like a miner has the right to go develop and extract the minerals. He also has the right to acquire more. He has the right to look to acquire more. And if that right is disturbed, that's a value as well, that an administrative imposition that deters that or restrains it to the point of economic viability, it is actionable as a demand upon the agency for the waiver or the compensation. And I would say, everyone wants to think it's a bulk payment. No, it happens all the time you would be doing it. So it'd be like an on and on payment. That'd be worse factor for them. So slowing down, taking a long time to say that. I hope light bulbs are going off here for folks. I don't know why this attorney hasn't come up with this idea. It's right there to be done. Why aren't we going to these things and reading them to become knowledgeable? That I guess I'm at that point. I know I'm starting to feel a little bit dismayed that someone like myself will not gain the support, will not gain the pass-through of information that should be going to everybody so that they all can help themselves. It is really kind of an interesting observation as well. We are becoming our own worst enemy. Those that are conducive to what I'm saying and what we think is being free and all this liberty-minded nonsense that seems to be going through in the wrong ways, and that's probably the problem. We're dividing ourselves without even noticing it. And that came prevalent in a discussion we had this week over this DAPL thing. Now, DAPL is a different issue. That's still administrative, but there's a different set of rules. If anybody would just settle down and read the rules, they'd see exactly what I'm saying, and they would know exactly what I'm saying, why I'm saying what I'm saying, and that if they don't do what that I'm saying, at least to the extent of their knowledge now, certainly anybody can learn this stuff better than me. But to the limit of the fact that I look around, no one knows any of it, I'm looking like a pretty big genius here that no one understands. But if you don't go that way, and that's the war field that you're in, you're not going to get much, and you're not going to get far. And if you put yourself body into those gears, you're going to get ground up, no doubt. And the answer is so simple if you look and find out where it is, and they don't like it when you get this answer. I literally believe I saw the jaws of 3 attorneys fall out of their mouth and hit the table and bounce back up. I know I know it had to be an optical aberration, but I thought I saw it happen when I asked them the very simple question, can I have the form for the waiver of the imposition of these rules that has diminished my economic viability? Did you get that, folks? It was one sentence. I didn't have to go on and on and on and on about all the rights that are violated, all the Constitution, this Constitution. No, we're in a bureaucracy and oppression, and that was the tool they gave us, and that's the one they don't want to let us know. And once you do that, it was just like we got our waiver, but they didn't make it official. Another one of those wins, you notice, that you don't really see the justice of, but that is still in force and effect. They didn't mess with us. What they then did is they started finding out who didn't hear that notice, and they started messing with those people, which is par for the course. And that's why I'm saying, if all y'all would just start doing this, they'd know there would be nobody they can go to. They better just start fulfilling the protections that are built into this, these administrative impositions and this bureaucratic life we're going into. So I guess that's enough said for the Oregon business. It can be applied to any business, any individual. I guess I could say individual. That's a business. That's a sole proprietorship under regulatory authority of the state, a state business, not yours. That when you are imposed to the point of your economic viability, or there's a harm to that, or your revenues, or whatever you want to call them, that's considered a takings, and so they have to ameliorate that. And this is typically for what they call small business. And so I don't know many of you all that'll be qualified as big business because you need 500 employees. So this would be most of the people that I would ever even speak to. Why aren't we doing that? Why do I hear so much whining? And when that provision's allowed, and then you go into a court underneath a charge, see, that's when you're shown to be derelict in your duty as a business owner in this world where they presume you to be the commerce entity. And I'm talking for those that have entered into that relationship. Someone who's filed paper with the state is going to say that I need to be regulated because I want the benefits of this law now. And they're saying, okay, well, we got other people that are out there, persons out there that we have to protect. So you'll follow these rules, and you say, okay, because you want the benefit. The problem is when the state fails to fulfill what the people say should happen. Now we have the big disconnect on whether or not there is going to be some takings considerations, and you just have to understand what, as someone who's in the business, or any harmed person, again, that legal entity that they assume upon you by your activity. The activity liable, the person liable is the one activity, the taxable, the permittable activity. Then you should be more cognizant of what's going on. And you should be able to know your remedies for these impositions. In other words, in another way, these regulations aren't really supposed to be set up to put the government in a power, once it's mandated by the people or the legislature, I should say. It's the administration is not supposed to be an impediment. And we continue to operate like they ought to be, and we give that authority its leeway to do so repeatedly. And when I come along to try and explain that, I get no pass-through consideration for other people. People don't really listen to what I'm wanting to explain, and the first thing is you have to go read some more. I think maybe that's the big impediment. No one really wants to do the reading. You just want to hear me talk about it. Oh, that sounds cool. That's a great thing. Let someone else do it. And that we are being preyed upon because none of us are doing it. And I mean that. I mean the none generally. Not enough for sure. And so now I need to move over here to the thing that got me considerate of this, and then found that I was remiss in telling you about this little waiver that sits right in there. It's only one section. You got to read all through the APA before you find this little thing. And you know that when I first read that one, I read right past it. It didn't. Reading something doesn't mean you quite understand it, or let alone try to apply it. So I say knowing a thing doesn't mean it isn't a power. It's not doing a thing. It's not taking advantage of the provision for that. Would you know that waiver was for due process considerations? Also, what's the authority behind why they had to is a whole different type of a study. It's not that long because it's pretty short. It's the due process, the administrative side due process required for mitigating of potential takings. That's your administrative side recognizing the Fifth Amendment of the federal Constitution, and possibly your state constitution, which is really where you start. So we were talking last week about the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and right after the broadcast, or it might have been right at the broadcast, and I was on air, and I don't get to see much of what's going on. I can only get the notice to us as I get it, and right after, there was a yeehaw victory that the Indians took up there about the government was going to not allow the permit or something. And they were going to do an EIS, and that they were going to stop the process to do an environmental impact statement. And it took a couple hours because I'm doing my post-production, but I started to think about that overnight. And my mind is not thinking about the Indians, it's not thinking about the company, it's not thinking about the government, it's thinking about this EIS as a process statement and a process step. And there was something wrong with that. And so my first question out of that was, where is the EA, the environmental assessment that provides the evidence for the existence of the need to get an environmental impact statement? Where's the environmental assessment hearing that provided the authority to even consider an EIS was needed? Was a process question that I asked and no one responded. And so I think the night went through, and I can't, again, this is last week or something. Then the next morning, I think it was, I kind of looked through the Twitter, it was, and Vince had made a statement in response to another Twitter user. And it was an answer, if you will, and I don't know if I went back to see what the question was, but Vince was saying, I think, and I'm speaking to this, and I'll use names. Normally I don't like using names. I don't want to sound like I'm judging or attacking or anything and all that. But I need, because he brought it up and they started talking about this, I'm going to go ahead and give feel that's license enough to rediscuss it a little bit to try and clarify some things. As I'm absolutely interested to remain neutral in this problem in order to bring out the process steps that allow people to do better and actually get what they want in this system they find themselves in. And at least until we can find a way to change some things. But I'm telling you, the more I look at some of these things that I see, some are not really so bad. They really are the big balance between perfection and our human nature generally. As I said, I don't know after I look at no evidence and people keep claiming about the fact that they have land that's being invaded or things. I'm wondering whether or not there's a deception there. That means that there's no nobility there. There's just a taking advantage for certain reasons, by ignorance or not, by being driven by being used as a stalking horse without recognition of that or not. I don't know. So I'm trying to take a very neutral position, and so that neutral position sounds to somebody that's and there's not many actually that sounds energy conducive or agrees with the pipeline. My position sounds like it's not enough. And if you listen to the other side, it supposedly is under water protector, which to me is just another water keeper, and that's a trespasser in other parts of the country. And then they don't do more than do what the environmental terrorists do. From those standpoint, then I don't look like I'm supporting them either. And I'm trying to say, you're not supporting yourself. You're your own worst enemy if you're not following the steps. As I said last week, if you become obstinate against what they are offering as the due process consideration and process to not steal or harm your rights. And that requires and puts a burden on everyone, to put something on the table that proves their rights and proves their harms, so that the agency then goes by the rules that are established to do what they call balancing impacts. Remember I said this is an EIS, is an environmental impact statement. They make a statement, they do all the findings of impacts, and then they make the statement on that, and in that it's the burden of the agency. Now the burden of the people on the table putting their proofs and facts is now shifted by that evidence to the agency in the process to, under the National Environmental Policy Act, is to balance under the standard of practicability all these potential impacts. And at that level, that innocent level, that's a big job that I don't know that I cannot fault anybody to try and do. And that's got to be a big job. But it's not impossible, and it's not really that hard when you start going by what I would call the law. The objective basis for property disposals, that would be your treaties and the actual legitimacy of what they are, and the evidence that may be outside of even all that produces pertinent rights and stuff. I'm saying you have to follow that process. I'm saying you can't assume into the process what you think is supposed to go on. You have to actually go in by the process, and that's how I opened up the DAPL discussion a month or so ago. There was major failures in the adjudicated record showed major failures on the side of the Indians, and whether or not there was a truth presented by the other side, which in this case would have been the government itself as well. Government's playing both sides of this, remember, and the pipeline people and the people that want that pipeline to run their oil through it. The evidence was presented by the industry sufficient to meet the very first criteria of the EA, which I was asking, where's that EA for this new assertion by the Army Corps of an EIS, an environmental impact statement? The environmental assessment, and this is all pursuant to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which I'm asking everyone to read so you see what we're talking about. Anybody who talks about the Standing Rock Sioux and does not read NEPA and apply it and the adjudication that happened around that injunction that they did doesn't really have an authority to speak here. And once you have, then we would look at see whether or not maybe what I'm saying doesn't quite meet. If you've got to become the expert in NEPA, and I'm failing, then maybe you can show me where I'm wrong. But in a way, I do this all the time because that's the process of coordination we do through the mining district. I'm not the go-to answer. There could be things that we don't address that are outside the scope of what I would know. But I'm just talking about the basics at this point that nobody seems to want to roll their sleeves up and go do. But so Vince comes in and says, I think it's a set-off and a project is only on hold with respect to the decision to have the EIS, everybody initially was woo-hoo, the Indians got a victory, and I was looking at it process-wise, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And Vince is thinking, well, on his Twitter that I'm starting to respond from, is he's thinking that, this is a trick in a way, I suppose. I'm reading into this. This is set off, and the project is only on hold. Yes, it was just on hold in the concept that they were just putting a damper on it so that the Indians would possibly maybe think that they had a victory. I don't even know the reason. But for me, I've got a problem process side that I want you to start thinking about. If you don't start thinking process side, like I was just mentioning with the Oregon marijuana industry, go into the administrative procedures, see where the implementations are not following or are harming them, and find out what the burden they have is in order to present the request for the waiver or determine the takings. If you're not going to go through those kinds of processes, then you're, first of all, maybe not entitled. That's, I guess, the first point. And secondly, then you're not listening, and you're not actually engaging the proper part to make this work for you. So I ask again, how did it go? How did it go to an EIS without an EA, and upon what hearings and evidence? And I don't want to pitch this too hard. Understand, not looking at who the parties are here. I'm not taking favoritism, which I started to see over time in the Twitter. Pretty interesting. What people that would agree with me on other points were favored. There's a favoritism going on in your own prejudices, and it's a little bit hard to stay in the neutral. But it's not impossible when you go to the black and white, because that's what guides us. And we're trying to figure out these relative impacts underneath a provision of due process that's been provided for it, that the Indians by record, the South Dakota, Standing Rock Sioux, have really, in my mind, been obstinate against. So I'm wanting to know process. No one has the information, right? I'm not getting anything to tell me where this EA is on the new EIS. See, the other one, and this is, I think, Kira comes in here and says, when I ask about the EIS, where's the EA for the EIS? I'm talking about the second one that develops on Sunday. And Kira comes back and says, that has been the tribe's question all along. It was pushed through. Well, this process was pushed through. Well, that really doesn't answer it, because I come back and say, but that's not what the record shows on the prior process. See, the record shows that nothing was pushed through, and there was an EA done that came to a conclusion of FONSI, or, oh darn, it just slipped my mind. It's why did I do that? Anyway, it's a FONSI answer, and it says, and I just went blank, and I don't know why. See, folks, I'm about over here, folks. Too much to talk about. Can't keep track of it. Anyway, it's a FONSI. It shows that by the evidence in the environmental assessment, the EA, whether or not there is an actionable impact that needs to go to the EIS. Maybe someone in the chat room can find out what an FONSI is and put it down and tell it to everybody else. I apologize for not having that. It's so simple. It just pushed my mind. But she's saying that the tribes have the question about this EA, although they've been pushing it through. And I said, but the evidence shows the prior process, not the one they put instituted on Sunday. The prior process shows the tribes were in fact involved, and they obstinately did not engage. But I say in the Twitter, even so, without explanation for this latest EIS imposition, without an EA, without the environmental assessment that precedes this demand or this process of EIS, maybe there's no lawful process occurring at all. Now, what I'm saying there didn't seem to gain too much traction. What I'm saying is, you may be right. You may be looking at a political answer here, but no one picks up on that part. I'm saying if there is an EIS without an EA, then the Indians have a position here to take it not as a victory, but as a diversion, a deception. And then Kira comes back and she now shows me for sure that she hasn't really read NEPA to understand what I'm talking about, and probably no one else that's responding to favorite the fact that the Indians are being violated all the time understands this either. She comes back and says the record does not show an EIS. That gives me the clue that Kira hasn't read NEPA or doesn't understand the process. And I don't want to sound like I'm not judging her, it's just the fact of this condition. And I say that's right because the evidence of the environmental assessment has to show the need to go to an EIS. The step back process that they sued to enjoined an EA, which found that there was no need to go to an EIS, an environmental impact study, study. And so she wouldn't find an EIS at all. And if they didn't do one for the new, if they didn't do an EA for the new one, you wouldn't find an EIS either. And so the fact of the failures of the EIS is telling us a whole lot when we understand there's at least an EA in the front. The first assessment showed that there was no need for it. And then she makes a comment on return of that, and I didn't really quite understand it. I tried to make sense of it. And so I just made the sense I could make of it, but I'll read it to you. And it may be words that everyone else understands that I don't. And then the statement is, Jacked gotta prove what can safely be assumed when drilling under. The sense I made of that was that whoever was doing the drilling had to prove that there was an assumption of the safety of the drilling. And that exposes another weakness, at least, in the understanding of the burdens of what goes on in this process. That if the Indian, anybody, and this is the other thing that comes out later, every property owner married the Indians, we're all on the reservation, but we all suffer the same impositions. And I'm trying to get people to understand the process better so they can better protect themselves. Some things are going to be inevitable, but you can start protecting yourselves. And Vince, on a previous broadcast on feedback, he mentioned some of those as someone who did pipe. And I readily acknowledged that and said, here's a tool you can use if you just use it. So my response in making sense of that statement, which I really didn't understand so much, was to speak to the discussion of assumed safety and the drilling, but with the assumption that it was upon the driller to prove it. And my answer to that, underneath the provisions as I understand the NEPA to apply, is once the industry provides any standard allowed for doing this process, the burden is on those to show the standard is not sufficient. So when they brought a standard that was done before, what I was telling you before was that everybody, property owners, the ranchers, the private property owners, the Indians, have to bring a proof that shows that that standard is not actually sufficient. I've said all this before. I felt pretty good about how I covered this in 140 characters in the discussion. And what I say there is I covered how to do what she was not understanding to do, how to cover that problem in a recent broadcast, directing anybody who was watching that feed to go find those broadcasts, because I have answered all of these actually. And then Vince finally comes in and says the oil company will defy an order, as referencing to an article written that was posted. I think it was over on the Free Thought Project. It was written by Claire Burnish. And so, again, recently I'm now, with this fake news abstraction, as I called it yesterday, moving on, I've been real concerned because I'm noticing that the so-called alt media is also doing wrongful reporting and not understanding the condition. It's the same ignorance that goes on about this process side. I'm trying to get people to understand that oil company will defy an order was an article, but I responded to that that I had already talked with Vince on this point, explaining to him that there's a way to discuss this whole thing without all the prejudice, the one-sidedness of the leanings of people, to put it back into law. And a thing that people may not understand. And what then triggered me to understand what was actually going on, that the declaration of the EIS for the new one was really proven to be a political move, was that I told Vince, and I'm going to say to you, that I don't know if you're aware of this, but the permit that was adjudicated, the process of the EA that was just adjudicated under the instance of the injunction petition by the Standing Rock Sioux, which went against them, was adjudicating the permit that was issued back and stated in her article, stating that the company would defy an order, says that the permit was granted in July of 2016 is the authority for them to continue. And I said to Vince, and I said this again in 140 characters after I'd thought about it a little bit, I said the permit reliance is not defiance. Permit reliance is not defiance. The article says that there was defying an order. That's not true. The record shows a permit that was issued that followed and adjudicated the process. This is not defiance, and so the statement of defiance caused another uproar, a bunch of people that are sympathetic to the Indians, all the Indian tribes' plight. And this is another problem. The expansion of this plight is really defeating them in their real harms. And this is what bothers me as well. The permit reliance is not defiance is a core important understanding you all have to have. That's what permits are about. Remember, even defined as the illegal act, it's the permission to do that illegal act. And here's why that that process was sitting there for anyone to bring any evidence that the process didn't meet to a practicable standard under NEPA the things that it was meant to do by Congress. That's not on me. That's on whomever is going to be imposed. What I found interesting in this Twitter dialogue is that a lot of Twitter favoriting and forwarding got done on every statement that was made where it looked like the Indians were being violated, and very few of mine were transmitted to other people to expand the awareness of what needed to be done to actually expose that, to actually understand how we address these oppressions, given that they are. And again, I'm taking so much time on this. I really, at some point, it's water under my bridge, but I think it's so important. It's where we're failing. It's how we fail. I see it in our responses. I see it in our lack of what I consider to be a proper response. You'd think that the conversation would wholesale be forwarded to everyone to look at and consider. And in my particular point, from my standpoint, I'd want to see that because I want to know maybe where I've got it wrong. Not on this opinion stuff. I'm talking in the NEPA. How many people have read NEPA and understand it and applied it that can talk on this? I don't know. But nobody uses the correct words in discussing it. No one yet has used the correct understanding of the process which informs me that we are talking from a standpoint of ignorance. And I'll just preface it again like I seem to have to. I'm not judging anybody. It's the fact. I'm asking us to stop being ignorant and start then applying what beyond what we continue to push as ignorance. Stop filtering the answers and to help people and the tools. Start promoting that. I have some real problems with the Standing Rock problem, the drill thing, but that's besides the point. I've said before, that's not actually my land or my any rights I understand. It's all the people that are there. Eminent domain is a powerful weapon that the government uses that I've shown you and I've explained before is not necessarily cut and dried, that I see hardly anybody discussing how this is supposed to be defended correctly. So after referencing this dialogue in Twitter, and my main point to Vince was, people have to read the NEPA to understand even what I'm getting at. Understand that there's a process. An EA comes before the ES, and you can't go to an ES without the EA. A finding of which would be what they call an FONSI. And if someone put it in the chat room, I'm sorry I didn't see it. I was going to use it as reference, but happened to see one little spot, and I forgot to pay attention over there. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You can find it. Type it in, FONSI. It'll come right up what it is. I'm just blown away. I can't remember. It's just not coming to me. Guess it's not important. Oh, finding of no significant impact. There it was. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. In my mind, it came to me. Don't know why I was occluded. Finding of no significant impact. There's a serious statement right there for you to understand what an FONSI is. A finding of no significant impact, the last word of which I never hear anybody actually talking to and about in the right and proper perspective. That they're talking about a finding based on evidence of no significant impact, as NEPA requires the finding to be shown, and the burdens, the relative burdens, which settle finally on the agency to mitigate and balance the problems of impacts as practicable. Now, Title 43, Public Lands Law, is where practical. It's slightly different. Practicable applies a burden as well, a big one, that the agency is under to take all this and mitigate where practicable, and that's guided by NEPA. So anybody who's not talking about this in that way tells me you can't possibly understand what I'm saying, and can't possibly make heads or tails about it, and can't possibly get where you may need to be. And a little bit of this evidence was in the follow-up discussion of Vince's show, was where I guess and I came in and I couldn't really hear all of it, so I don't know how much I missed, so excuse me for whatever I didn't hear and what might cause the potential here of a misunderstanding. Again, I'm feeling I'm not intending any accusation. I'm trying to give guidance. And so if I'm mistaken, we'll fix that guidance. It's not going to change the outcome here, because I see people still making a mistake, whatever my interpretation of a show was, a broadcast. But Vince was talking to Kira, and I noticed when asked what was done in the process that she had seen, that she gave answers which wouldn't fulfill the burdens of the process. So where's the reference to that? So if anybody heard that, she referenced the naming of 3 endangered species. And people, because of the imposition of the environmental terrorists, believe that's the cat's meow. I got an endangered species. Stop the train. And so she named off 3 endangered species. But that's not, in the concept of the NEPA, that's not a touchdown at all, as people believe it might be. But if I got a spotted yellow-legged frog with fur and feathers and wings, and it's only a small population, that would stop the world, is not what NEPA actually does, though that's what has happened until the mankind's environment stepped in. And when you go look at NEPA, you're going to find out that the word environment, as I've explained before, is actually a 2-part definition. There's nature's environment and there is mankind's environment. And people don't quite understand when you're talking about the Indians as a tribe, you're talking about them on the mankind side, but they're arguing on the side of nature. And that's not how that all works. So there's like another convolution that no one really sees. In particular because I don't think anybody has read the NEPA and sat down with the rules and sat down with how this works out and looked at some of the processes and maybe even reviewed what I've said for clarity to try and move them up on speed. But the NEPA process, underneath this word umbrella term environment, which includes 2 parts, requires a balance, which alternatives you'll hear done. Alternatives must be presented for the agency to make the determine. And the agency having a further burden, as I've said just prior here, they have a further burden once you do that, to prove what is practicable, to do a balance of impacts between environment of mankind and the natural environment generally. All this is found in the NEPA Act. So where people believe you can just name an animal, a critter, a fuzzy bunny and a reptile or whatever that is being harmed, that settles it. That's not it. Even the cultural side, same thing. You just can't state it. As I was saying before, you have to bring the evidence. As I asked last week, why weren't the maps presented? Why didn't they help themselves out and bring the maps? Now, because you state in the process, you state that there's a species that may be harmed, that doesn't end it. That invokes another law, and they have to look at that whole part. And this, where practicable, in context of NEPA, doesn't mean that the project doesn't go through. In fact, I opened the very first discussion broadcast that says that even the attorneys know this is not going to stop any of that. The environmental attorneys knew that. They know what the score is. It's the Indians that don't quite listen. And then the environmental attorneys weren't actually doing the process. Given there's a cultural problem, a trespass problem, a treaty problem, none of that was in the record, and nobody will complain that it wasn't in the record, and that's all I can go on at this point. See, I'm trying not to take sides, because if I don't take sides, I can sit in the neutral view and I can see, hey, listen, you may have failed here. You need to bolster your position here, which I've offered in 3 different broadcasts, and I'm doing again right here today if you haven't figured it out. So, and I'm just saying, I don't know, anybody believes me when I say this. I don't know what you think in your mind. I don't think how your prejudice of the idea will overcome the fact of the reality, but anyone obstinately refusing to do these simple beginning steps has no standing to complain. And in a way, I see the pragmatism of how they go about doing it. Despite the fact that I know that there's a corruption in the system. If you don't bring your best foot forward, though, you don't have the cause, you don't have the standing, you don't have the evidence to show how corrupt it is. And that's what's going on that bothers me for the Indian cause, given that there is one. And I say that in all, I haven't seen it yet, folks. I hear it, but I don't see it. And I've offered some counterpoints that would help that position, but none of them seem to use that. So, also in the conversation, and contrary to Kira's complaining of being purely an Indian harm, if you listen carefully, if you think about this as an overview of the nation, what she complained of is happening to the Indians, is what's happening to most all property owners, and in almost all areas, all areas, it seems to me. And it's because all of us that are like in this condition don't know at all and absently accept the attorneys to best protect their property when we've had the record that they aren't in that position at all. And we had that when I read behind the Woodshed that House resolution document from the House delegation resolution from the Bar Association. They are on the environmental agenda to all property owners. So if you have a reservation, you have a right, you have a cultural right, that's a property to protect that the attorneys are going to defeat somehow. In preference to what? Sustainability, sustainable development. You all think that's a big good thing. The Indians are being used for their favor as a oppressed people on the international level to use them to impose these impacts that are detrimental to everyone, not just the Indians. Sustainable development includes what? Carbon change. Climate change. Carbon change. That's what it is. That's transformation. Societal transformation by carbon. Climate change, it's carbon markets, smart cities, all these things we hear. The antithesis of property rights and remedies. What I've been here to tell you to protect. I'm trying to show you the elements here every time I come. By notice, what we call the news. This fake news is interesting. It's notice to me, so it's not fake. It's telling you something. You just got to figure out what it is. And I'm trying to give you the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So you're not as dupable as y'all and myself. You all have been, like I had been, and now to a more extreme limit for me. They're not going to get past me so easy. So in this regard, The Indians there, no Indian tribe has a monopoly on oppression. And I refer again to Russell Means. He succinctly stated it. He said, we all live on the reservation. It's what I've been saying in different terms. You live in an occupied territory. You're living underneath, what do we say, a military consequence. You're living in battlefield America. You're not living in the place that they told you. You're living in the reality that they haven't told you about, that you don't think is there. So all I'm asking in all this process is that we have to acknowledge that truth. So that we can take the better action. So if we can't acknowledge that truth, we're fighting an illusion, and we won't know our illusion from the one they gave us, like this fake news nonsense. I told you what's happening with that. I'm real concerned about it, and people are responding in the way I hope they wouldn't. We'll see, though. I'm here to talk out a little against it so we can keep a distance from it. In fact, I found an answer in a new bill that came right on the heels of all this fake news nonsense. As I talked yesterday, it was an abstraction. If you go look what's going on, it's another form of what people would recognize as the Hegelian process. They possess all the elements and they have the objective. This is no different than what I'm talking about is going on here with Standing Rock, or what goes on with the farmers, the ranchers, the miners, with all these attorneys, with the process of consensus, with the process of dispute resolution, with the systemic corruption that goes on. It's all the same. So I've added a little thing, and I'm going to add this to my blogcaster because now it's the law, folks. We got to stay, as I said, I'm beyond media. I said that weeks, months, a year ago, whatever. I start saying I'm beyond this trap they're building for us. And so are you. And we just have to, again, learn the words. If you didn't know there was an exemption for the harm done to you on a regulation, this is the same thing I'm talking about. Embrace that part. Don't fight it. And so, we're now behind the woodshed. We're engaged in counter-propaganda tactics and related work. Why? Because that's what the government's going to support. Those engaged in counter-propaganda and related works. That's what I've been doing, folks. But the problem is, and it exposes this whole thing about what this fake news abstraction is, the ones who are speaking it are the propaganda, right? What have I been talking about all the time I've been on broadcast? But counter-propaganda, engaging the counter-propaganda tactics and defeating them. No different than stating there was an EIS coming out of last week for the Standing Rock Sioux victory. No, that's a political statement. That's not a statement in the law. And because nobody knows how to do all that, thank you, Free and Slave, the open-air prison. I forgot it. That was slipping my mind. That was what I was thinking for. Because they are the propaganda, they push the propaganda, I've been trying to show you how to counter that. Don't get into the sides. Don't get lost on a cause. Find the principal foundation and start going from there. Otherwise, you're just fodder. I just say that, and I can just tell you, it just saddens me to watch us do this to ourselves. So we're engaged in counter-propaganda tactics and related work behind the woodshed. Have been all the time. It's now law. Or at least it's coming very close to being law. Why? Because this is what the fake news nonsense is all about. This is how they get you off the track of looking at what the requirements are, and you never assert them so they know you don't know about them. It's the same way I listen to conversations of people and know you haven't read the first word on a lot of these things that I talk about here, and yet you're talking about them. You're making judgments on whether they work or not. You're saying that, you just throw them all in the big can and say it doesn't work and won't work, and you're not going to work toward it. And I'm sitting back watching this, I don't even know what to call it. It's just a wrong thinking. Well, we're actually using these same things I'm telling you to make giant steps. We just ran across another one this week. I've seen decades ago that local land use ordinances were improperly put on land. We just broke it down in a county. That county just acknowledged the fact, and it's caused a real ruckus, but they now see what the law is that they've been violating, and it's now going to change. They've actually got letters of acknowledgement of the problem, and they're going to be fixing it. violations to all property owners that the state was never authorized to do underneath this authority that's come down. Every bit of it is a felony. It's literally the treason I keep telling you about. We didn't break it down by snubbing our nose to the processes that are available to us. We engaged those things that we knew protected us. Those vested rights we hear about, yeah, they predate all of this nonsense. For every one of y'all that think I don't know what we're doing or we don't talk or that doesn't work, you haven't read the right things and actually applied yourself correctly. That's all I can say. And I'm just reading now again. I look up and see Free and Slave in the chat room, which is very rare for me to do, but thank you anyway. Thank you, Free and Slave. You cannot expect justice on stolen lands. That's right. But it doesn't mean that there's no justice. It just means you've got to roll up your sleeves and protect yourself as a people. And I say use the tools that are there to do it, and then there's others. This is not the, what I'm telling you right now about Standing Rock and the administrative process, that's just the administrative part. There's so much more we do. So much more to do. That's why I say we just need a lot of people doing it, but it's like a whistle while you work, actually. It's kind of funny to watch how this thing rolls down. We lost because we have to fight for something that should have been protected. So that's, in a nutshell, is why there's no justice. But at least we get the system back to the way it was supposed to be, not the corruption it's become. And as I say that, I've just remembered I should have said it earlier, and so late, I should have said it early on. The Jefferson Mining District Assembly agreed to withdraw the petition for signatures for those of you that want to protect your rights and the minerals that were granted to you or your little ones in the future. That petition's going to be pulled probably by the beginning of the next year, or this coming year, if not sooner. And I want to thank everybody who did sign and send that petition. You've given us a wealth of cause to assert back, so it's not our opinion now. That was one of the points. And when we finally get to working on that project, we have the evidence to show the harms that backs up what we've been doing all along as well. See, this is how we try to do that. We try to build so that our work is magnified as we move along, not spread out too much. We really don't have the manpower to make too many. We can't make the assault too wide. We won't be successful. Thank you very much for all of y'all that went to jeffersonminingdistrict.com, clicked on the petition, got to the page, filled in your name, and just sent it off. And what it did is it sent off to the 8 or 9 natural resources officials in the government your petition that said that these attorneys are working to steal your property and don't have competency, first of all, to even talk about it, let alone representative capacity for your property and rights and remedies. That's the nutshell of that petition. So thank you very much, but I want to put a note out. I forgot last week that I was going to ask. It's now been approved that we're going to be pulling that petition and moving on to try and do other things and protecting ourselves in other ways. There's more assault going on yet as the battle continues. But, I'm not feeling all beat down about it. It's just a matter that we are in the stolen lands, and I'm glad that we figured it out. Think about that, folks, if we hadn't figured it out. And that's the other thing. For everybody that would dismiss what I'm saying or think I have a wrong idea or maybe going down the wrong path, you haven't created a different path. You haven't shown me anything, first of all. Secondly, we're witnessing the theft. We're witnessing how it happened. We're getting a first-hand knowledge of it. And we are sitting in a position, if we will accept it as people, to not ever let this happen to us again. And instead I hear whining and complaining and fighting in me and not passing the information on and favoriting things that are still wallowing in the muck. We have a swamp that's not going to be drained. It's going to be dug deeper because we continue filling it with our incapacity. We keep allowing it. It's pretty simple. And so back onto the conversation that came up about Claire Burnish's point, and they said the title being Oil Company Openly States They Will Defy Army Corps Order in Standing Rock. You have to look at, I tell you can learn everything from the title. If you understand the EA was adjudicated to adjudicate also the correctness and lawfulness of the permit, and I hadn't heard any quality objection to that, I have to go with that, then we know that there's a permit and it can't, the industry can't defy a lawful order What happened on Sunday or whenever that happened from the Army Corps was unlawful. It has no authority whatsoever. Why, I asked, where's the EA? What process are they using here? And why was I the only one interested in that? All y'all should have been saying, whoa, what's going on here? And to me, coming up with that is a much better position to take. I don't know why other people would think different, but when you've got the record to show the harm, you're at least sitting a better than to be touting a position that you can't prove. So the permit that was issued, the industry can rely on that, and it was adjudicated, and it wasn't overthrown. The district court has that power. Until it's overthrown, they can rely on it. So there's no defying anything here. But see, the propaganda from alt media is, and people, I assume, Claire wants to do right. She wants to, promote what she can promote, I suppose, was to actually not have a basis of law in her to make the statement. And I don't think that helps anybody. However, people are honest in their approach to want to see something fixed. That's not how it gets done. That's not how it's going to get done. And so all this is going on, and another issue comes up. Well, while the eyes were on Standing Rock, Dakota Pipeline was drilled under Des Moines, Iowa River. As if there's this big concerted plan, actually, to try and show more collusion and try to put on this other issue. When you read the story, you'll get the broadcaster. There's been a bigger, longer fight going on for that one. But what was interesting, and they're going to drill it. They drilled it. They just happened to do it at the same time. I don't think it has to do anything with, these people want this pipeline in. There isn't good opposition that I can see. There is some things that can be done. And then in this story, it evidences that at least some people did what I had said before I said it, to try and protect them against harm in the future. And it was accepted. We have the evidence of it in this story, which is not highlighted. So I wanted to highlight it for you. In this article, it says that there is an injunctive case going on against the pipeline because the Utilities Commission of the state ordered that the industry produce a bond to make sure they could pay for cleanups. It's not much different than I said you needed to do, except that I was wanting to apply the money to a better pipeline, given, as the attorney said in the first instance, you can't stop this that way anyway. Why? The practicability standard for the impacts of humankind, that they'll say in another section of another code, would mitigate that. You have to find an answer to resolve both. That in this state, even though they got the bill, they also have a provision in law that says that the industry is going to have that bond. Okay, so they drilled the pipeline. Oh, well, what do you mean? What's that going to do? Well, they have at least a better position to say they've been harmed by the fact of the failure of having the bond because they don't have the money yet. And guess what they can enjoin? Oh, they got your pipeline through, but you can enjoin the transportation of the product through that until they satisfy the bond requirement. And so they've enjoined the process, all lawful like. No one's getting beat down any more than they had been before they started this, upon an issue I said you needed to do, and I don't even know if it was done in Standing Rock area above the reservation. I heard from Vince, notice to me that being on a pipeline, he knows he'd seen that there was improper installations. I said that could be solved, and there was also inferior work, that could be solved, and there was also no maintenance contracts. That all could be solved, and then on top of it, you can have a bond presented to the state that they pay for to mitigate the harm. Does that mitigate the actual environmental harm? No, and that's why I said there's another thing you can ask for. I'm pointing out here in another story that was used to say, oh, there was a deception, a sleight of hand going on while they got you looking at Standing Rock. Well, here on the same pipeline away, they actually drilled the hole. Well, there's a little different thing there. There's a little different thing going on that you need to see that and understand what I'm telling you is applicable that may not have been put in. That's why the Standing Rock issue is going down the way it's going down and will continue to go down. So before, we can get lost in the sleight of hand deception going on that I think we're just deceiving ourselves by not doing more proper things. It looks like in this story they're doing more proper things. There is still the corruption that they drilled anyway without the bond. Okay, we have another line we can throw. You judicially enjoin the passage of the product through that pipeline until they can produce at least a bond to mitigate the potential harms. As I was saying before, we know by history, and was it John Bolenbaugh shows, those funds will only cover it up. So you have another thing you can put. I'm not saying the pipeline doesn't go through. I'm saying that in the reality of the balances of all the needs and admission by the attorneys that said that we can't stop it anyway, you should be stepping up in the best processes and the best evidence to make the best pipeline that you can do with the best protections that are practicable. Again, the decision made under NEPA, the ignorance of which you're going nowhere in this. It took me a long time to go through more than I was thinking, as it usually does. I hope that clarifies some things. I hope it gives you some more things to think about. I'm just asking you to consider the better way, a better way. Yeah, it's not just having everyone recognize your rights, but that's the complex society we live in. I don't know more about that. I just know when we did it every other way, you get run over. You get put in jail, you get beat down. One of the statements in this article was a quote out of it. I'll just read it here. One of the other issues at stake, an issue now is a justiciable issue. This is a court issue now. One issue, one outstanding problem. The Utilities Board required the parent companies behind the pipeline prove that they have the funds to clean up a spill, and Sunoco Logistics hasn't provided that proof. The lawsuit goes to court on December 15th. Hopefully it's nice and simple. Simple injunction, at least it's simple, injunction of the product that goes through that pipeline since it's already been put in. Now, I have a problem also with the saying that Sunoco would have the proof that they have the funds. Might be better placed in a state account, not to be managed by the state, to sit there and gain interest so that the state knows that much is ready to go. Because under its police powers, it can actually tap from that, take that value that can actually fix the problem instead of hiding it. One more potential protection, because in the fact of it is once the oil starts seeping through the ground, it's caused damage that may not be completely fixable. Although we have technology to do that too. It just becomes so big a problem as well. I'm not disregarding all that problem, but there's a reality about our society. And I don't know what more to do right now except for get a handle on the tools they've given us at the administrative side while we're working out to make sure that the farmers and the ranchers, and if you have a property, even the Indians who have this pipeline going through, that they understand how to defend against an eminent domain proceeding. Because it's not cut and dried. I keep telling you about that. Don't underestimate the power about why your land was disposed to you exclusively. Remember, that's a beneficial and public use that's held up when you make the evidence and held up against as a defense against their need. Now, whether that's strong enough, it will depend on what they come back with. As I'm thinking, my mind is thinking Meisterbrow, saying, where's the nuggets? I'm giving them to you. They're at least steps in the right direction that nobody I see understands or takes. That I was a little dismayed to watch a lot of Twitter feeds being, lots of favoriting on the Indians getting violated, and not much on mine saying, hey, here's how you fix a lot of that. Here's why they're being violated. They're not actually being violated. They're violating your perception of the world and reality. If you really want to protect water, there's a way to go about raising the bar high enough that it practically does so. So I'm hoping that even though there might be some feeling of attack, maybe, I hope not, like I'm attacking people, this is the hard lesson behind the wood. This is the dose of reality. You just have to get over that. You have to start looking at the realities. If you have a better proof, bring it. Don't argue with me. Don't not present what I'm saying for other people to think about. This is what I say about the forums. We got Freedom's Network, and we have any other social network. We're just not using these very powerful tools to our best effort. We do other things. We sit in division amongst it as well. We make all the excuses about how we're not going to engage. Whatever they are, bottom line is it's not going to work and not be good enough. It's certainly not going to support someone who needs the help. I don't even want to say it. It's almost like I'm looking for a pat on the back. I'm not. I'm wishing for the Indians a much better. If they represent the way that's supposed to be, that looks good for all of us too. But I don't understand. I'm just beside myself in a way over why everyone's so resistant to start doing a better thing and would just denounce what I'm saying out of hand or just ignore it. That's like what I get from the government. The crickets. Fascinating stuff I watch. Watching people do other things instead of the things that could be done, that's another proof. It's like not using the right words. If you don't speak in evidentiary impacts cognizable under NEPA that you've brought the practicable solution for, forget it. Stop talking. The sacrifice was for naught. I was hearing Ron Steffen talk about the prophecy of the black snake. Okay, I haven't researched that. That sounded like a PR thing to me, but I understand the prophecy side and the symbology. You know, to me, when I heard that, I said, that just was predicting that the Indians were never going to be sharp enough to figure out how to stop that snake. That's not the snake's fault. That's our inability to deal with it. The prophecy that it would be to say so. And yet I look and I say, okay, well, there are certain things we can and can't do. Why don't we start recognizing what those are and start working within that? Why make the problem such a big commotion? Why divide ourselves in doing it? Why get united under the false cause like I see this fake news stuff coming? I told you, be careful what you get consolidated into as you fight the cause. And it's a fabricated abstraction. It's an illusion itself. But going on from also last week, I want to move on now. Hopefully you're still hanging in there with me and I didn't talk too much and too fast on some of the more easy technical concepts of this. No, I didn't give you the list of things to do. I gave you the concepts of how you go about it. I understand that. One-on-one, people know that work with me. When we go one-on-one on projects, we know I get the answers really close together. You see the path. Right now, I'm just trying to show you the trailhead that has to be gone down by a whole lot more people until you start getting the foundation, until you pack your bag for the journey. Read NEPA, at least. I might as well not, I just can't talk more. There's nothing more to say, actually. And yet I'll know you haven't, I'll know when you read it. I'll know exactly when you read it. I won't be able to deny it myself. But last week I was talking about, remember I kind of said, well, you know, I wonder what our problem is. I didn't realize that we were such a dysfunctional people. I brought up to school, I kind of enjoyed school. I liked learning new things. I liked helping people learn new things. So school wasn't really a big deal, and I don't know so much about the indoctrination so much. I was kind of indoctrinated about thinking that the world was my oyster and I could go out and take whatever, make it whatever I wanted. That certainly proved out to not be quite so true. And other things, not relative to government, came into your life. You got all kinds of stuff that hits you in the face that you're not totally prepared for, and you're not mature enough, even though you think you know it all. And that's okay. That's our interesting learning process. But there was these other things that were really oppressions that I had to learn about, and I was wondering why we were all so conducive to that oppression, and not many of us sit up and say, wait a minute, I see that I'm feeling the pain, but all of a sudden now I'm not sharp enough to figure out what to go do about it. And so I said, well, maybe these vaccines, I was telling you last week, these vaccines where the study was showing that neurological damages happen 6.6 times more if you were given, I guess your mother was given a vaccine preterm when you were a baby. that you have neurological dysfunction, that you're not going to be able to function. Well, this week we got the notice to us here coming soon. Meet the cyborg beetle, real insects that are controlled like robots. Was another ant colony a statement to you in the epigenetic damage that chemistry and environment can do? And we're not, again, environment, it's natural and not the natural. It's the man-imposed environment. So be careful on what side you pick in this process of the balance, the teeter-totter of NEPA and what they're actually doing. Maybe when you read it, you'll start to understand why the industry of pesticides and all kind of gets the upper hand. Why they don't do those studies to produce the evidence of impact that would offset the balance in favor of a more balanced approach. But here's another one of those notices to us. Meet the cyborg beetle, real insects that are controlled like robots. Have you ever considered yourself an adult, folks? I talked about this last week. You adult insect. In a gender-neutral legal system, they talk about gender in funny ways. And when they do, they talk to you about you being an animal or an insect pest. So here's the story for us of our future. And this is pretty fascinating in some regard. This is like a hypnosis as well. Meet the cyborg beetle, real insects. So real adults that are controlled like robots. The future is crawling towards us in 6 legs. Motherboard traveled to Singapore to meet Dr. Hirotaka Sato, an aerospace engineer at Nanyang Technological University. Sato and his team are turning live beetles into cyborgs by electronically controlling their motor functions. Having studied the beetle's muscle configuration, excuse me, I'm looking at something else here. So much going on. I want to make sure I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I'm sorry for the delay. Where was I here? Having studied the beetle's muscle configuration, neural networks, and leg control, the researchers wired the insects so they could be controlled by a switchboard. In doing so, the researchers could manipulate different walking gaits, speeds, flying directions, and other forms of motion. Essentially, the beetles became like robots with no control over their own motor functions. Interestingly, though, the researchers control the beetles through wiring. Their energy still comes naturally from the food they eat. Hence, the muscles are driven by the insects themselves, but they have no willpower over how their muscles move. I didn't know an insect had willpower, so that's a new, well, at least acknowledge willpower. But here it is. They're talking about you adult insect, and that they can, through electronic means, control your function, your mobility, and over your willpower. And then near the end, I won't read on more, they say, and the critter isn't affected adversely more than the control. It has no thought about it. That I'm pointing out again, coming in as we were talking about the neuroceuticals that are in small nanoparticles. They get enough of those conductive smart connectors in your body, they become what the electronic connections that can be stimulated outside the body is. If you thought you were in control of yourself, you find yourself in a spot that you don't quite know how you got there, look real quick to see if you have a gun or a knife in your hand, if there's a dead body near you. Maybe you are susceptible, folks. South America is an interesting place. The indigenous people and the cultures of those are fascinating, but the international governance people, psychopaths, are utilizing those to harm them and all of us by utilizing the nicer sounding things of what they're doing in order to impose an obligation on every one of us to fulfill the needs of the psychopath, sociopath, parasite, whatever it is you want to identify. That's not natural to us. And as I was telling you before about the monkey getting rights, and then soon it's going to be traveling up to the banana republic called the United States of America, and it's going to get a EBT card. and whatever else it demands, as its social justice will require. We're seeing now the backup behind that decision in another country down there in South America. Bolivia passes a law of Mother Earth, which gives rights to our planet as a living system. Now, we heard this coming, and they were talking about it. It's not news, but it's now official, if I can say it that way. The law of Mother Earth holds the land as sacred and holds it as a living system with rights to be protected from exploitation, and creates 11 distinguished rights for the environment. It was passed by the Bolivian Plurinational Legislative Assembly. This 10-article law is derived from first part of the longer draft bill drafted and release of the Pact of Unity by November 2010. And we please spread this law? There has to be a way for the free market to interoperate with reverence to this planet, period. So this is the Pact of Unity. I told you about the problem of unity. This is where now Mother Earth has rights, where if you look at the NEPA, it actually speaks to all this stuff. But what they're doing is they're now taking it and doing what? They're taking it out of anybody's hands to decide what those rights might be. They've defined them, and they will decide. Protected from exploitation. What they're saying is they are going to try and put the world into non-use. That's a war crime. And yet this is becoming something that the supposed legitimate legislature has imposed. And on the surface, everybody will say, well, what's wrong with Mother Earth having rights? And you're not thinking this thing through, is all I can tell you. It's the same problem that you have up in South Dakota, or excuse me, the Standing Rock Sioux and the water protectors, which I know as water keepers, and they're doing the wrong thing for the wrong reason compared to what the objective is. That the processes would actually help that tremendously, and I would think that people would want to embrace that. And so I won't go more than to tell you it's becoming what used to be written as policies and goals and objectives that put a date on it. Apparently they had a goal 2016 to put this in, and they got their goal. And now Mother Earth has rights that are defensible in their courts against you, determined by them. And they sit in the seat of decision. How do you think that's going to work for you? Now, when I look at the Standing Rock Sioux condition and how all that's been just completely blown out and improperly imposed, that almost scares me to death to think about having somebody that has absolutely zero clue about how it really works actually making the decisions. And then to watch the Twitter feed actually embrace that ignorant position, that foundationless position, running only on raw sentiment and emotion and perception. I'm really concerned for us that this is now coming out. This is now not even this is out in supposed law. If this was a part of the United States law, it would be of treason. And you all would be out of being able to determine what you thought was freedom, what you thought was liberty, what you thought was private property. And all the Indians that are up there selling their oil and through making the refinery that we read about, yeah, that hypocrisy, which I don't think is a hypocrisy actually, but I'm saying in the context of fighting on one hand to stop a pipeline and then building the materials that'll go through the pipeline and sucking out of the earth the oil glands of the earth, sucking it out to go sell it to people. I don't know how to think about that. Then listen, we live in a reality. We need this stuff until we can come up with a solution, alternative, a viable one, not this green nonsense, but a viable one. We're kind of stuck to this until we can work it out. And if we do it sensible, like NEPA looks like it can do, we don't have to worry about giving somebody the determination of what Mother Nature has as rights to be protected. Because when the way we have been looking at it as on the producer side, we've realized the proper use of the land by development by man actually increases Mother Nature, and in a way that's not detrimental. And the environmentalists will be aghast that I even said that, because they think that cows hurt forests. They think that allowing forests to overgrow and burn to cinder and sterilize 6 feet deep, that's Mother Nature. That's the rights Mother Nature has. In fact, that's a war crime, and it's a crime generally. It's a waste of resources, if nothing else. And I won't go on more. There's more to say. A lot more people talk about this more than I do. To me, it's simply the fact that you're giving inanimate objects that are already taken care of. When you look at and apply the law right, that the attorneys and the system applies wrong to oppose this kind of agenda that they have control over, you missed the boat entirely when you started to allow it and didn't step up and say, whoa, hold on. As I'm trying to do with NEPA, at least looking at that, at least get yourself an orderly approach. Quit being so obstinate. Quit being so helpless. Quit thinking you're the only one oppressed in the country. I'm telling you, and I've been telling you, every property owner is oppressed in this country right now. And we got here by some method. I was talking, maybe it was at vaccines, maybe it's the pharmaceuticals, maybe we just, I don't know, maybe it was just the air we breathe, the chemicals they put in our food. Now we understand that we can have electrical impulses put into us that controls us like what robots, and our willpower is not sufficient to overcome it. And we're okay with that. And so this other thing that's been coming on this week and throughout is a new affront to us that now everyone's taking up as a cause is really concerning to me. And I wrote about this, I finally decided to speak a bit about it way back December of 2015. It was old news by then, but I wanted to at least put it on the record, explain to you all. I said it was in the Blogcaster, it was a bill to deceive you. And it was a link back over to this law that happened, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. And I told you, whenever they have an act that's modernized, be careful. It's got the new agenda taint on it. It won't be what you want. It'll be what they need. And so we have this thing called fake news that's popped up, and everyone's now pointing at everybody's fingers are blaming the situation with the election and all this fiasco going on. And at some point we really can't tell any of it, but they're utilizing it. I say they are utilizing it because they have a plan and you don't. That this Smith Modernization Act is, in my mind, and I asked the question, and it came back affirmative, and that's close enough, good enough for me, that this is really the execution of that act modernizing the Smith-Mundt Act, which said initially that you can't deceive people. The United States government, and in the United States government, you can't deceive the public. In 2012, they removed that provision, saying that essentially propaganda was okay. Now, from that standpoint alone, I don't know what this fake news thing's all about. But they sure got people taking sides, like they got at the Indian thing, at the Standing Rock. When you look around the property, other property owners getting just as violated. They actually, in that one article, says they actually have a bigger protest going on in the other one. And the drilling still went on, but they have a little provision. They have to have money. They have to have money to protect it. Now, I don't know if that happens over at Standing Rock Sioux at that end or not, but there's one of the things I was telling you start to do. You start heaping that stuff on the table during your EA process, forcing it to the EIS, which then requires the burden on the agency to make balance in the way the Congress is supposed to and not harm people, if you understand what I'm saying. You're all focused on the nature. You got to go and focus on not harming the people. It's on the other side of the NEPA process you're missing. That this propaganda thing, I mean, if we hadn't seen it before we got here and before even I started broadcasting, it was made official they would be able to propagandize to you. I don't know what fake news is about. And I looked at this and said, this is the execution of that that 2012 act. This alleged allegation of fake news promoted by those that do fake news now. If the Fox, there's the Fox case against the reporters. The court came back and said, no, the Fox News can lie. They can say whatever they want. They have a right to lie to you. It's underneath the First Amendment. What the reporter says as a whistleblower, it doesn't rise to a standard of protection because they have the right to say what they want to say. They're a person that has the freedom to say what they want to say. And this gave us another notice. That it was... I was reminded, I think, by Grimner that Gary L. had apparently just posted before I was asking a rhetorical question about the execution of the 2012 Act that I think Gary L. apparently posted a link way back in 2012 in May. The NDAA legalizes the use of propaganda on the United States public. What's the question in the battle, folks? I said be careful to get rallied up to pretend there's a war here that you got a side to defend on. It's partly why I said behind the woodshed we're beyond media. I'm not going to get engaged in that. Why now? I've said this morning now. I'm going to add engaged in counter-propaganda tactics and related work behind the woodshed. You can too. Show up, listen, start acting out like a little kid that you are. Start acting at least out in the way I'm suggesting here, and learn to do better as you go. A lot better than engaging in an abstracted war that they have all the control of the elements, and those elements they want to push through, and the objective. And then what do we get? Right in this week, it comes out that Senate silently passes the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act. And so what did I do? I said, well, that's the part of the fulfillment of the execution of the 2012 law. I said that in a Twitter. They're getting what they want right in front of our face. And yet inside I also said there's answers, at least to my way of thinking, that they say in this act that if it comes to be law, I don't know, it's H.R. 6393, Intelligence Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 2017. Apparently it's only going to be 1 year long. It's going to be probably tied to the NDAA as well. But they're going to advance monies for anyone and organizations and whoever, people, corporations, whatever. And those engaged in counter-propaganda tactics and related work. And so I'm anticipating our problem. I'm not engaging in the war. I'm saying, okay, that's the standard. Let's jump on it and grip it with both arms and step on it with both feet. I am doing already what your act is going to say we need to do. But what do I do behind the woodshed? I expose them. I exposed that system. I exposed, more importantly, how to think about that and what to do in order to counter this war that we're in. Now, will I get any money for being engaged to counter propaganda tactics and related work when I'm pointing them out? Well, obviously, probably not. But it's going to be a hard line for them to push that I am part of the problem of fake news, isn't it? Doesn't matter what my name is. It matters what I'm doing, and so here I am. I'm doing what I'm saying I'm doing. That I point out the very ones who allege the harm is exactly what so-called alt-media should already be doing, not in the way of drawing lines, and not in the way of counting how many times fake news is fake news on the MSM side, so they can make and count how many times the alt-news is faked. No, you have to address them at a different level. You position yourself in a way that you're doing what they claim to be doing. And now it's just you looking at them in the future, and you're not culpable. You can't be held liable that way unless they cause themselves to be that way, and that's your first point. In other words, from here on out, our first statement is, just as an aside, where the United States government stated that there was WMDs and fake news, lied and promoting that to people, here's our story. And I'm telling you folks, the standard you better go by is that you better not be wrong once. And this I'm going to go not as a judgment, as an indicate, just as a point, where Claire Burnish, if that's her name, made the statement that it was the industry would deny an order where she didn't actually know what she was into with the NEPA and the standard of the process. She failed at that point. She needs to rise up above that failure. She needs to learn the subject matter she's talking about, because I think she has something to tell us, I guess is the point. Like any of us do. We are all witnesses to the crime against us. I want us to articulate that nice and clean, on point, and not use the traverse where we are folded into the idea that if we say, 3 endangered species got attacked, that is the end-all be-all. It's not. It's the start. The burden now begins. We can solve that. I am asking that we do that. I only name names today to not to point out anybody in judgment, to say these are people that are out there. These are the ones with the heart. These are the ones that are doing something. We need to do better. Because I think once we do better, we will guide ourselves to the narrow path that we need to be on to be doing what we need to do and not what we think is working, and then we find out causes us to be the massive failure we have been. Why do I say that and say that I see a light at the end of the tunnel that way? Because when I said it before, we apply these principles, we're getting a whole lot more traction in the right direction and actually getting things to accomplish what the law protecting us is there to do, even against the opinions of whomever in the government, be they officials, be they employees, or more importantly, be they those bar association members there to control the condition. So let's go to fake news a little bit. Again, not as the fake news. You know, I don't deal with this as real knowledge. I deal with it as notice. And you have to now figure out what the notice is, and whether that's alt media, whether or not that's a mainstream clap, corporate lame-ass propaganda. Grimner called it that a long time ago, right? So this is not news. The fake news is arguing about fake news. The problem is you're coagulating up like some blood clot to be identified that way instead of moving aside that. Don't get involved in that battle and just start hitting them with the fact of their error and then your fact that's irrefutable. Not like I see going on now. And it's not that you have to do what I'm doing, but you can't make that mistake once. And I've told you before, I don't know how we're doing it except that we maintain an accurate focus on reality, and we make an accurate assessment of what needs to be done, and we only do what we can show is the black and white narrow path. And that protects us so far. That has protected us so far. And we, on that level, apparently have not made a mistake once, even though we're full of flaws. Even by innocent omission, like I did with the marijuana story. I mean, that was a bigger story to tell you, do you know that there's administrative processes to waive regulatory impositions if they affect you? And I hope maybe you missed it, but I said in your economic harm. See, it's all about money. It proves the whole system's about corporate property, profits, money. It proves it again. All you folks that think you understand what's going on. You're in a system. You're in the prison, the open-air prison. That's it. You got to figure that out and respond to that. But getting over to the so-called fake news, no, it's notice. It's notice that they're lying to us and how. You have to have another third brain cell to figure some of this out sometimes. Maybe a fourth. What I'm saying, I'm not insulting you. I'm saying it's not that hard to figure out once you start having the eyes to see and the ears to hear. The proper stuff. Fukushima, radiation detected in Tillamook Bay, Gold Beach. For the first time, seaborne radiation from Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster has been detected on the west coast of the United States. Can I stop reading already, folks? Do you hear it already? Over and over, Fukushima has attacked us again, now for the first time. Cesium-134, the so-called fingerprint of Fukushima, was measured in seawater samples from Tillamook Bay and Gold Beach in Oregon. Researchers from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution are reporting. To my great dismay and disappointment, I wanted to go to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution when I was a little guy coming up. I wanted to be an oceanographer. I wanted to go to Woods Hole. Maybe not in the way it's now portrayed today. And wow, what have I be looking at now had I been there? Now, what happened to all the other times all that Fukushima attacked the United States? I don't know anymore, folks. From 2011. How did it all come here? But you know they did the same problem. This is not fake news. This is showing you that there's these are conservation biologists, scientists pushing an agenda. This is how I look at this. This is the proof. This is evidence that that's who you're dealing with now with Woods Hole and these scientists that would speak in this article and talking about all the technical side that's irrelevant to the fact that, remember, the currents of the ocean of the Pacific cannot and will not allow any water that's that it comes from Fukushima to make it to Northern California or British Columbia, where they first supposedly found it, up the tributaries, in the salmon, where we know that court case against the Chicken of the Sea company proved that it wasn't in the ocean, from the ocean surface water, it was from the volcanic vents, and the mercury in that fish did not come from those rivers, as the environmental conservation scientists had said and evidenced in the court record. They lied. Same thing here. For the first time now, I wonder what all the other reports we heard about Fukushima water hitting the West Coast, this is the first one now, folks. What I'm identifying is, again, the culprits to the lie and the propaganda. Not that it's fake news, not that it's the lie, but who's doing it and having the evidence to prove it. Yeah, lots of people go off on this and they completely won't agree with what I'm saying, and that's okay. It's not okay, but I can't stop what you think and feel and perceive and of what ain't so actually. And there hasn't been a better proof than the one I presented behind the woodshed, is the dose of reality that keeps us understanding that there is no thing as fake news. It is all a lie, and it's up to you to find out what isn't, because within the fake parts is the parts you need to know, the parts they're giving you notice for on what's going on. There's no, whatever they measured, well, it can't be shown to be viable. It just can't be done. There's no theory that would allow that water to even be there, let alone having any radiation in it. And yet they admit something at the very end. Oh, well, it's had a half-life of 2 years. It's barely there now. But watch out, the 137. That's got 30 years of half-life. So now you get all involved. Oh, maybe there's a cesium-137 down. Well, no, it didn't come across that way. Remember, the currents, we talked about them, they go down to San Diego. And only in a rare instance do they come up in a counterflow up to Pacifica. That's the highest the water can possibly go. The currents don't go there that way. The Pacific gyre, the big washing machine spin that goes on in the earth, does not allow the flow to go there. It's a complete lie. This is a deception. This is a fraud. This is not just fake news. See, if you buy into fake news, then you buy into it's not a crime. You buy into it's just fake. Oh, they have the right to do this. Well, they do up until the time it affects somebody. That's a crime. Up until the time it defames somebody. That's a crime. And I'm surprised there was only one, but I'm surprised there's not more people that have said that. And for as much as I thought I was going down my tabs and getting done today, that didn't happen again, did it? So, we'll not move another story forward. It's not fake news. What we're seeing is a crime and a propaganda by the government against you. What I try to do behind the woodshed is give you the eyes to see and the ears to hear, to know that, not just because you know they're lying, but what to do with that lie if you so wish to. I don't know I can't make that decision. That's really up to all of us, and we can pass the wrong information. We can get behind our pet projects. We can rally behind the Indian cause, whether or not they're doing correctly, whether or not they actually had the evidence when they've given plenty over plenty times, whether or not even still they understand what's going on. We're going to give them support on a thing that really just didn't have to happen, and we're going to promote that in everything we say to promote that lie. That's another lie. And so I'd rather wish we don't do that. I want us to see, if the Indians have something to protect, I want it protected, not what I see going on now, just because we wish it. So I think I've said enough. I hope it helped. Thank you for tuning in today. Again, Grimner, thank you for the work you do on reallibertymedia.com and the space for the broadcaster and the archive for everybody for free, folks. Donate if you can. And Jules, UCY.tv, and Grimner and Bo Diddy helped keep that freedomsnetwork.com running for a social network, which I really believe these tools are there that we could use to become formidable. We're not yet. We're not even close. But notwithstanding that, it's still a hope I have. If I have hope and change, let's change that. Let's get beyond the hope of that, change it, and get it working. And then terrestrial broadcasters, I do appreciate it. Graham Mary, again, thank you for the Spreaker account so that we have a lot of people going through that, a few anyway, and constantly. And thank you very much for the listeners to do that. Again, markonthebeach@yahoo.com. You got a different view and a real, something you think is a real better interpretation or answer, let me know. All I can help. I have the voice. I have the platform. I can get it out if I'm wrong. So take care. I'll be here next week.